We all know the old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But how? When we look at a figure like Robert Moses, the master builder of New York, it's easy to see the absolute corruption. We see the man who bulldozed entire neighborhoods, displaced hundreds of thousands of people, and ruled with legendary arrogance. We see a monster. Today we're going to explore how power itself, the very thing he sought for good, acts as a psychological drug. It can erode empathy, inflate narcissism, and create what neurologists now call Hubris Syndrome. By the end of this analysis, you won't just understand Robert Moses. You will have a framework to recognize the subtle psychological transformation of power in our leaders, our colleagues, and perhaps even in ourselves. He began his career as a brilliant, passionate idealist, a reformer who fought a corrupt system to build beautiful public parks and beaches for the working poor. So what happened? How does an idealist become a tyrant? That is the real why of this video. This isn't just a history lesson. This is a psychological deconstruction. Welcome to The Mind Explained, where we are dedicated to exploring the most complex subject in the universe, the human mind. For those who seek to understand the hidden patterns behind our actions, we analyze the light and shadow within us all, one unforgettable story at a time. I'm so glad you're here. It's evening here. What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments, along with what you're hoping to understand about the psychology of power today. To understand the man Robert Moses became, you must first understand the man he was. In the early 1900s, Robert Moses was the definition of an idealist. He was brilliant, educated at Yale and Oxford, and he was disgusted. He was disgusted by the cronyism of New York's Tammany Hall political machine, which hoarded public good for private gain. But most of all, he was disgusted that the poor, the working class, had nowhere to go. No green grass, no clean water, no fresh air. His bright side was a genuinely noble vision. He wasn't just imagining parks. He was imagining social equity. As Robert Caro details in his monumental biography, The Power Broker, Moses's early career was a righteous crusade. His crowning achievement was Jones Beach. He fought entrenched political interests, billionaires who wanted the shore for themselves, and stubborn legislators. He bent rules, he charmed, he bullied, all in service of a single, beautiful idea, a public paradise for the common man. And he won. This is a pattern many of us recognize. It's the passionate founder, the driven project manager, the one person in the office who is willing to work all weekend to get the right thing done. He had proven that one man, with enough will, could bend the system for good. And in doing so, he got his first real taste of a drug more potent than any other, unaccountable power. He learned that to get things done, you didn't need to persuade, you just needed to win. The question is, what happens when that idealist no longer has to ask for permission? Prepare to understand what happened inside Moses's mind. The answer isn't just moral, it's biological. It explains how power acts like a form of brain damage. The psychology behind the power paradox is far more sophisticated than you might imagine. We'll delve into it next. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to The Mind Explained. We've just seen the idealist, the man who built Jones Beach for the people. Now let's pull back the curtain and look at the actual neuroscience at play. Because understanding why these tactics work is your ultimate defense. This brings us to the central question: why power corrupts? The answer isn't just moral, it's biological. Dacher Keltner, a psychologist at UC Berkeley and author of The Power Paradox, explains that power, in a very real sense, can act like a form of brain damage. His research shows that when people gain power, whether in the C-suite, in politics, or even in a small team, their brains change. Specifically, the pathways that control empathy, the orbitofrontal cortex, become less active. Keltner puts it bluntly: power makes people behave, as he says, like they've suffered a traumatic brain injury. Think about that. The very skills that often get you power, being empathetic, collaborative, and listening to others, are the first things the experience of power begins to erode. You become more impulsive. You are less able to read the emotions of others. You start to believe your own ideas are inherently better. For Robert Moses, This wasn't a theory. It was a biography. As he consolidated power, creating public authorities that he controlled, he became an island. He no longer needed to listen to mayors, governors, or the public. He had his own money, his own police force, and his own army of engineers. He was accountable to no one. His empathy network didn't just go quiet, it flatlined. And as it did, his behavior began to mirror the symptoms of a very specific and very dangerous clinical condition. Prepare to understand the clinical checklist for this behavior, known as Hubris Syndrome. How many of its 14 symptoms did Moses exhibit? The answer is chilling. We'll delve into it next. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've seen how power can physically rewire the brain, shutting down empathy. Now, let's pull back the curtain and look at the specific psychological diagnosis that explains this terrifying transformation. If you're finding this psychological breakdown of power valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button. It's a small click for you, but it tells the algorithm that these are ideas worth spreading. In 2008, David Owen, a former British Foreign Secretary and neurologist, coined a term for the psychological transformation he saw in leaders: Hubris Syndrome. It's not a formal medical diagnosis, but a set of 14 key behaviors that emerge in those who hold great, unchecked power for too long. Reading the power broker against Owen's checklist is chilling. Robert Moses isn't just a case study. He's the poster child. Symptom 1, a messianic way of talking and a tendency to self-glorification. Moses began to talk about his projects not as public works, but as quasi-religious crusades. He described his team as disciples. He didn't just build roads. It was, in his words, the Creator. When you believe you are on a divine mission, the people who oppose you aren't just critics, they are heretics. Symptom 2, loss of contact with reality, often associated with progressive isolation. This is classic Robert Moses. For decades, he was driven in a private, chauffeured limousine from his Long Island mansion, over his bridges, to his private island headquarters on Randall's Island. He never took the subway. He never walked the streets. He was literally insulated from the city. He was reshaping. He was passing judgment on neighborhoods he had never set foot in. Symptom 3, contempt for others and unaccountability. This is where the transformation from idealist to tyrant is complete. Caro tells the story of a public hearing about the Cross-Bronx Expressway. A man, an assemblyman, stood up and begged Moses to reconsider the route, explaining it would destroy their entire community. Moses didn't just say no. He was heard to mutter to an aide, tell him to go to hell. He had lost all contact with the common man he once claimed to serve. He was not just building structures of steel and concrete. He was building a fortress around his own ego. But that leads to a critical question. How did he live with himself? How did the man who once fought for the poor justify displacing, by his own low estimates, over 250,000 people? Prepare to understand the hidden architecture of justification and how leaders build a justification engine to dismantle their own morality. The psychology behind this is far more sophisticated than you might imagine. We'll delve into it next. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to The Mind Explained. We've seen the diagnosis for Hubris Syndrome. Now, let's pull back the curtain and look at the actual psychological tools Moses used to live with his decisions and neutralize his own conscience. This is, for me, the most fascinating part of the psychology of fraud and power. It's the justification engine. We all have one. It's the story we tell ourselves to bridge the gap between our actions and our morals. The legendary psychologist Albert Bandura gave us the foundational work on this. He called it moral disengagement. It's the psychological toolkit that allows good people to do bad things and still feel like good people. This is the language of the tough decisions memo, the right-sizing email. It's the cognitive software that lets otherwise decent people execute ruthless strategies. And Robert Moses was a master. When Moses was confronted with the human cost of his projects, he had a simple, devastating reply. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. This is a textbook example of what Bandura called advantageous comparison. It reframes a brutal act, destroying a community, by comparing it to a trivial one, breaking eggs. It makes the destruction seem small, necessary, even productive. He also used euphemistic labeling. He wasn't destroying neighborhoods. He was performing slum clearance and urban renewal. The language itself sanitizes the violence of the act. And finally, dehumanization. When a group of mothers in the Bronx organized to protest his expressway, he publicly dismissed them as just a bunch of mothers. Not citizens, not families, just an annoyance. With these tools, Moses could justify anything. He had Keltner's power-induced brain damage, Owen's clinical hubris, and Bandura's moral get-out-of-jail-free card. He was now, in his own mind, infallible. And he was about to unleash his masterpiece of destruction. Remember that phrase. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Prepare to see the devastating human cost of that justification. We'll look at the dark side in full focus next. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've just seen the justification engine that allowed Moses to rationalize his actions. Now, let's look at the devastating real-world consequences of his fully corrupted power, embodied in one single project. This is the Cross-Bronx Expressway. It is the ultimate monument to the dark side of Robert Moses. His own engineers and dozens of other planners begged him to reroute it. They had alternate plans that would displace a fraction of the people. But those plans meant bending to public will. They meant admitting he was wrong. And by this point in his psychological transformation, that was impossible. Hubris Syndrome doesn't allow for dissent. So, he drove his expressway directly through the heart of a thriving, working-class Jewish and Irish neighborhood. It wasn't a slum. It was a community, and he destroyed it. He displaced tens of thousands of people, shattered a community, and plunged the South Bronx into a spiral of decay it wouldn't recover from for half a century. He broke the eggs. But the omelet he promised, a better, faster city, never materialized. The expressway was obsolete the day it opened, creating a permanent scar of traffic and pollution. This is the end state of unchecked power. It stops being about the public good and becomes about your good, your vision, your ego. Robert Caro, the author of The Power Broker, said that when he was a young reporter, he asked a veteran journalist, "How do you get to the bottom of all this?" The veteran replied, "Power doesn't corrupt. Power reveals." So which is it? Was this darkness in Moses all along? Or did the power truly, fundamentally, change him? Prepare to understand the final framework that answers this question. The psychology behind this pattern is the key to the entire video, and it's the pattern you need to recognize in the world and in yourself. We'll bring it all together next. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to The Mind Explained. We've seen the idealist, the brain damage, the diagnosis, the justification, and the catastrophic result. Now, let's pull back the curtain for the final time and assemble the complete framework for how power corrupts. The answer, I believe, is both. And this is the framework I promised you. The psychology of power is not one or the other. Power didn't create Moses' arrogance. Caro's book shows he was brilliant and arrogant even at Yale. But power unleashed it. Power acted as an accelerant. It provided the means for his arrogance to become policy, and it removed the constraints, empathy, accountability, and his own conscience that keep most of us in check. So here is the pattern. The psychological blueprint for how idealism becomes tyranny. 1. It starts with a noble cause. The person genuinely wants to do good. They fight the system to build the park, or launch the product, or fix the company. 2. The power paradox. Their success grants them power. That power begins to shut down their empathy, making them more impulsive and less aware of others. 3. Hubris syndrome sets in. They become isolated. They see themselves as messianic, and anyone who disagrees is an enemy. 4. Moral disengagement is deployed. They create a new language, a justification engine, to explain why their increasingly ruthless actions are still, in fact, for the greater good. You have seen this pattern. We all have. The new manager who comes in full of bright ideas, and 5 years later is a petty tyrant of their own tiny kingdom. The political leader who promises to clean up the system and ends up becoming the system. The psychological transformation is subtle, but the pattern is identical. Robert Moses held absolute power for 40 years. He was never elected to anything. And in the end, he left behind a New York City physically divided by his works and psychologically scarred by his hubris. He died believing he was a hero. The human mind is, above all, the greatest storyteller. And the greatest story it tells is the one that lets us live with ourselves. This is the pattern we explore at The Mind Explained. If you believe, as we do, that understanding these dark and bright sides is the first step to building a better world and a better self, then subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Now, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, let me know, have you ever seen this hubris syndrome in a leader you've worked with? And the more important question, how do you stay grounded when you get a little bit of power? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next analysis.